That's right, today we're making pasties. I know how it's spelled, but one of these things is not like the other. Pasties are of Cornish tradition. It's a savory hand pie, similar to like a calzone or a stromboli or something like that. But this is actually made with pie dough, so it gets nice and flaky. And pie dough is not all that hard. Making a pie is a little bit more technical, but making the dough itself and then using it in the capacity that we're gonna be doing today is not difficult at all. In fact, it requires a lot less than making something like bread. I'm gonna measure out about 1.5 cups or 180 grams of all-purpose flour, and then I wanna take 1/2 cup of that tallow that we made together on Patreon. In this case, I'm gonna melt it down, put it in a 1/2 cup measuring cup, throw it in the freezer because we want everything to be as cold as possible for as long as possible. So we're gonna go in and out of the refrigerator. I wanna start with cold ingredients and I wanna chop this up. And you could do this in a food processor, but for the 1,000th time, I don't want to clean a food processor if I don't have to. So I'm gonna put it on my cutting board. I'm going to chop it up into roughly pea-sized pieces. If some are larger, that's fine. If some are smaller, that's fine. It just gives me a good benchmark. And once I can't really successfully get my knife through that anymore, I'm gonna go down with some flour so that I can cut this flour into this tallow, and it's gonna start to make my crust. Go back with the flour as many times as you feel like you need to, and then we're gonna get this all in a bowl. And in that bowl, I'm gonna clean my knife off with a rubber spatula. I'm gonna get everything into the bowl. I want to put all of the rest of the flour that I have measured out in that bowl, along with about 1/2 little spoon of salt. And this is about twice as much salt as is usually recommended for a pie dough recipe, but I say that the combination of fat and flour, especially when you get those flaky layers, is just so magnificent. It's so simply wonderful. But you can't taste it without any salt in there. So I say get a reasonable amount of salt in there. 1/2 teaspoon is not that much. I'm gonna combine these by pressing some rubber spatulas down. I don't want the heat from my hands to get at this just yet. And when I'm satisfied that this is kind of combined enough where I don't really have to do that much with my hands, then I'll get my hands in there and I'll squeeze and press and make sure that this is very, very well combined. And it should look and feel a little bit like sand, like slightly wet sand. It should hold together when you press it, but then it should crumble apart when you put a little force on it. So when this is the consistency that you want, sort of wet, packable, but still loose sand, you want to get yourself some ice water. And I'm gonna go in with about 1/4 cup, about 90 grams, right off the bat, because I know I'm gonna need about 1/2 cup, but I don't wanna overdo it. Sometimes you hear people say, I added 18 tablespoons of water. Well, guess what? That's a whole cup plus 2 tablespoons. That's 1.125 cups of a cup. I know I want about 1/2 cup, so I'm just gonna cut that 1/4 cup out right away. I'll go tablespoons after that. If you're making a bigger batch, you can do about 60% first and then tablespoon yourself to death. But you do want to do that step every time. This needs sort of an exact hydration, but that doesn't mean don't do this step. You do want to add the water incrementally, because as the seasons change and as the dryness and humidity of the air change, flour changes a little bit, and this needs a pretty precise amount of hydration. You want this to be able to hold together but still be a little bit crumbly, just like the end product of a pie crust. I'm gonna wrap this in plastic wrap and let it rest in the fridge for about half an hour, let all of that flour absorb all of the water. You're gonna get a much more predictable product that way. You're gonna be able to work with it a lot better. So don't skip the resting step. To make it a little bit easier to roll out, I am gonna flatten it just with my hand right before I put it in the fridge. So while this is chilling out in the fridge, what I want to do is get my ingredients ready, and I already have one of those ingredients ready. I'm going to use my all-purpose pulled beef. That is linked in the description below. I'm also going to use an onion that I'm going to cut into sort of half moons, very thinly, but you don't have to. I'm also going to use a potato that I'm going to slice very thinly with a potato peeler, but you don't have to. I've had this before where it's very chunky. You use cubes of sirloin and dice your potatoes and onions and just get your whole meat mixture into there. Makes for a very different experience, and I'm doing it this way now because I have the pulled beef. I sort of want to layer everything together and get sort of layers of flavor. So I'm gonna mix up my spice mixture, and here I'm just going with parsley, pepper, salt. I'm gonna mix that together and put down layers of onion, potato, beef, and I'm gonna season in between every layer for maximum flavor. After that dough gets done chilling out in the fridge, you wanna bring it out and cut it in half. This could make about 3 smaller pasties or maybe 2 large for a very hungry coal miner. I'm gonna throw the other half back in the fridge and I'm gonna roll this one out on a pretty heavily floured work surface. And we're dealing with a little bit of an oblong shape here. So what I'm gonna do is start from the middle and push out. Rotate it, start from the middle, push out, come back. And on the sides where I don't have that much give, I'm going to push maybe a little bit harder, and when I'm long, I'm gonna push maybe a little bit softer. Don't go all the way to the edge. You wanna build up a little bit of a rim on the outside that, especially when you're dealing with this sort of awkward shape, you can turn and then push the other way to give your project a little bit more spread. I hope by now that you know we need to keep this cold whenever we can. All of those layers of tallow can't afford to melt until they get in the oven. So I'm gonna roll this up back over my rolling pin, cover it in plastic, and get it into the fridge for another 15-20 minutes, let it firm up. And when I bring it out, it's gonna be noticeably more firm, and I'm gonna have a lot better time trying to fold it over my ingredients than if I had just tried to do it right then. And now we build. I'm gonna put down a layer of onions and season that, and put down a layer of potatoes and season that, and a layer of beef, season that. I got up to 3 layers high in this, but don't overstuff it. A good seal on it is better than overstuffing it. At this point, you wanna preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius. You wanna prep a parchment-lined baking sheet. If you don't have parchment, make sure to grease your baking sheet. And we're gonna fold over our ingredients, and we may have a little bit of a lip left on the bottom portion, but that's okay because we can fold it over. I'm gonna get my fingers a little bit wet and wet the areas that I need to stick together. The flour will prevent that, but if you get it wet, that's gonna be no problem. So fold over onto the wet areas, pressing down as you go, and then we get a fork and really seal the deal. all the way around. The last step is to create some ventilation because this will steam open, this will split and potentially make a mess if we don't put some intention down and just create a couple slits on top. That's where Stromboli gets its name. Stromboli is actually the name of a volcano, and that's what can happen to ingredients encapsulated in a dough. It can steam over and become volcanic. I like a razor blade for this because it's sold to me sharp. I'm pretty good at sharpening my knives, but sometimes they're just not quite sharp enough, and I'll go in and grab my dough and check it the wrong way, and then we get a little bit of a weird end product. So I'll just cut through all of the stuff and use a razor blade. Usually 3 perforations on top is exactly fine. You want to egg wash this. Egg wash is just a drop of water in 1 beaten egg, and we're gonna wash the entire thing before we get into that 400-degree Fahrenheit oven for 45 minutes. Now, once that timer goes off, you're gonna take it out and you're gonna put a little water in each one of those perforations. I go with about a little spoon of water in each one, goes back in the oven for another 15 minutes, and then you're ready to eat. But before we eat, I wanna thank Susan B, who just recently upped her Patreon subscription to the duck egg level. Before, you got all of this content ad-free and a day early, but now you get the duck egg show, which is every month I'll make something on Patreon that ties the entire month together. It pertains to the entire month, so it's just a little bit more extra content, a little bit more inclusivity. And the videos that I make for this channel are made possible largely in part to the incredible generosity of my Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work I do here on Self-Serving Skillet, you can support the show at patreon.com/selfservingskillet, linked in the description below. You get the extra content at the duck egg level, but even at the $1 a month level, you won't have to watch advertisements like this. All right, out of the oven and having cooled for like 30 minutes or so, it's very handleable, and that's what we want. This was originally just the pocket meal of coal miners. And we could have made this a little smaller. We could have gotten 3 or 4 out of that whole dough that we made, and they would be about this big, nice little snack. This is more like a lunch, I'd say. Let's cut into it. Oh man, this just looks amazing, and it smells really good too. It smells amazing in this house. This oven's been baking for 2 hours because I did them one right after the other. Let's go for just the crust first, because I'm very excited about this tallow crust. It is unbelievably flaky, and what you lose from it not being buttery, you definitely make up in like other savory departments. It's nice and roasty, toasty. Should go with this beef very well. And I really like this thin cut on these onions and potatoes. They become sort of a guest star instead of like a supporting actor here. But you could definitely make everything chunky, and it's gonna work just fine. This is amazing. You should get in the kitchen and make yourself something amazing. This beef is available in the description below. So now I've made something savory, something sweet, a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner, a dessert, all with this beef tallow. And if you want to see more of that, I have more episodes of using that beef tallow, multi-purpose, right over here.